Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Nicole's defense this morning. As Nicole's major advisor, it is with great pleasure I introduce her and some of the people who have been instrumental in helping her reach this milestone. I'd like to start by thanking the rest of Nicole's committee for supporting Nicole in completing her research, including Dr. Chip Collier, Deputy Director for Science, South Atlantic Fishery Management Council, Dr. Susan Lovelace, Executive Director, South Carolina Sea Grant Consortium, and Dr. Gorka Sancho, Professor, College of Charleston. I also would like to thank Lucy Davis for coordinating this defense, among other supportive roles, a lot of behind the scenes work. So thank you, Lucy, for your work. And also Dr. Annette Watson, for Program Director, for championing, challenging, and elevating graduate students, including Nicole. My journey with Nicole began with a conversation about her interest in pursuing a topic for her thesis on sea turtle biology, or at least turtle biology and conservation. Multiple discussions and iterations later, she devised a thesis topic in partnership with Dr. Collier and his colleagues. And I have to hand it to Nicole. It has not been easy, especially in the beginning. So thank you, Nicole, for sticking it out. It's been truly a pleasure. Throughout her graduate education, she has demonstrated a tremendous amount of tenacity, fortitude, patience, diligence, and competence. The exceptionally challenging circumstances of her times did not thwart Nicole. She forged ahead, consistently producing high quality work, setting and making deadlines, and even nudging her advisor from time to time. She didn't miss a single meeting and always did her very best in everything that she pursued. It has truly been an honor and a privilege to work with Nicole. Her contributions to the field were recently recognized at the Coastal Society's 2021 Student Poster Competition, just this past spring, and she ended up winning Best Student Poster, among other accomplishments. It is with great pleasure that I would like to formally introduce Nicole as she presents her work entitled Perceptions and Adaptations to Bag Limit Sale Prohibition Among Charter Boat Anglers in the South Atlantic. Thank you. Take it away, Nicole.
Thank you, Dr. Lavender. All right, we will get started here. All righty. Let's see. Let's get this all fixed up. All righty. So, hi everybody. Thank you so much for attending my thesis defense. Today, I'll be talking about the human perceptions and adaptations that were observed in response to a regulation imposed on 3 recreationally important fish species in the South Atlantic. Before we get started, I want to give a big thank you to my advisor, Dr. Ashley Lavender, for all of her help and support and for sticking with me throughout this entire process. I also want to thank the rest of my committee, Dr. Collier, Dr. Lovelace, and Dr. Sancho, for their unending patience and assistance. I would not have finished this project without all of you. I'd also like to thank Christina Wygand, who was a big help getting this project started, Lucy Davis, who always had advice and encouragement when I needed it, and all the EVSS faculty for sharing their knowledge with me. Most importantly, thank you to my family, especially my parents and my sister, for always loving me and believing in me, and for all of the optimism, support, and laughter you give me. Lastly, I'm thankful for my faith, without which I could not have made it through this season. Here's a brief outline of what I'm going to talk about today. So first, I'll get into some background information on fisheries management before diving into the project methods, results, and analysis. And then we'll wrap up with a Q&A session at the end. Fisheries resources have been managed for millennia as a solution to control catch quantities of valuable fish species. While the goal of resource management is to protect or conserve the resource, it is only by influencing the behavior of people that management goals can be reached. For fisheries management to be successful long-term, it must be approached through the triple bottom line of ecologic, social, and economic sustainability. Achieving ecological sustainability requires detailed knowledge on the biology and life history of the target species, while also understanding how the species could be impacted by environmental and regulatory change. Objectives are typically met when maximum biological production is reached, which can be determined using tools like stock assessments. Social sustainability requires an understanding and weighing of stakeholder interests, including cultural traditions, identity, and beliefs. Social objectives strive for maximum employment and food production levels and aim to meet equality and safety goals. Economic sustainability is often deeply intertwined with social sustainability, as the financial benefits of fishing are commonly aligned with the cultural values of individuals and communities. Cost and profit are considered here as economic objectives strive for high profits for all players involved. To achieve sustainable fisheries management, the federal government has created laws and agencies to provide oversight and enforcement. In 1976, the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act was passed to govern marine fisheries management and to eliminate foreign fishing fleets in U.S. federal waters. The National Marine Fisheries Service oversees fisheries management within these waters, which are comprised of the 200 miles off the country's coastline. To further divide management responsibility, 8 regional councils were created. Each council develops fishery management plans to manage fish stocks residing within that region. The South Atlantic Fishery Management Council is responsible for managing fish stocks in the Atlantic off the coasts of North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and the east coast of Florida through Key West. The council serve as advisory bodies to the federal government. They develop new fishery management plans and devise amendments to existing plans, which are given to the National Marine Fisheries Service to approve and implement. 3 types of fishing are recognized in U.S. waters: commercial, which is for a profit; recreational, which is for sport or pleasure; and subsistence, which is for personal, family, or community consumption. Since each type of fishing serves a unique purpose, different forms and levels of management are often applied to each type. This study focused on the recreational sector. Charter boats are one popular mode of recreational fishing. These for-hire vessels are operated by a captain and crew and have a maximum of 6 passengers. Recreational fishing has a significant impact on the cultures, economies, and marine environments around the world. Most environmental impacts attributed to recreational fishing are minor, as they occur locally, are often reversible, and have the potential to be managed at a local scale. However, recreational fishing also has been found to have severe direct and indirect impacts on biodiversity and ecological resilience through release mortality, environmental contamination due to lost fishing gear, and trophic cascades due to predator removal and population decline. Recreational fishing impacts social structures by generating employment, fulfilling social, communication, and relaxation roles, providing cultural benefits, and food provision. In 2003, recreational fishing included 58 million anglers, supported over 950,000 jobs, and generated almost $40 billion in expenditures around the world. A comparison between harvest trends and the commercial and recreational fisheries indicated that recreational fishing in the United States has risen in importance, magnitude, and effort, with recreational landings rivaling commercial landings for some major fish stocks. One commonly used management tool in the recreational fishery are bag limits. Bag limits restrict the number of fish anglers are allowed to keep. In theory, bag limits should reduce fishing mortality and reduce overexploitation by reducing the number of fish that an individual angler or vessel are allowed to keep. However, concerns arose over the sale of recreationally caught fish whose catch quantity is restricted to a bag limit. Because these fish are caught recreationally yet are sold for a profit, they have the potential to be counted toward both recreational and commercial quotas. As a result of this double counting, inaccurate catch data might lead to an early closure of the commercial sector. One way to combat this issue is to prohibit the sale of fish caught under bag limit restrictions, ensuring that federal regulations are both fair and equitable, while also yielding more accurate data. This project analyzed the impact a prohibition of bag limit sales had on 3 species in the South Atlantic. The goal was to determine how stakeholders perceived the sales regulation, and then how the charter sector reacted to its implementation over a 13-year time span. Qualitative public comment data were merged with quantitative catch data from Dare County, North Carolina, and Monroe County, Florida, with catch data coming from the recreational charter sector. This study is important because it combines pre and post implementation data to give a broad picture of the effects of a prohibition of bag limit sales in the South Atlantic, which can be useful for future management efforts. The species under analysis for this study came from 3 separate fisheries. All 3 species experienced a ban on bag limit sales within a 5-year period and play an important role in the charter sector. The first species I looked at was blue line tilefish, which is managed within the snapper grouper fishery. Its sales regulation went into effect in December 2009, and the current bag limit is 3 fish per person per day from May through August. The second species is dolphin, otherwise known as dolphin fish or mahi-mahi. It's managed under the dolphin wahoo fishery, which placed a prohibition of bag limit sales on the species in April of 2012. The current bag limit is 10 fish per person per day. And the third target species is king mackerel. It's managed within the coastal migratory pelagic fishery, which passed its sales regulation in July 2014. Currently, the bag limit for king mackerel is 2 fish per person per day in Florida and 3 fish per person per day in the rest of the South Atlantic. So I had 3 overarching research questions that guided my analysis. The first was, how did stakeholders perceive the prohibition of bag limit sales? The second was, did the prohibition of bag limit sales affect the number of fish caught by charter boats? The third was, how did the charter sector respond to bag limit regulatory changes? And I'll get into further details about how I answer these questions next. All right. First, I'm going to talk about the qualitative methods. So the qualitative data consisted of public comments submitted in response to the proposed sales regulations. Comments were either shared orally at public meetings or were written statements submitted via mail or email. Comments were given by a variety of stakeholders, including anglers, businesses, NGOs, fishery associations, and government entities in response to the 3 proposed amendments. Within each proposed amendment, there is one action to discuss bag limit sales. Within each action were multiple alternatives. Since management looks different for all 3 species, each proposed action and alternative are unique to that fishery. One commonality between all 3 actions was a no action alternative, whereby current management actions would be retained. Each action also contained at least one alternative specifically addressing bag limit sales. So public comment data were thematically analyzed using grounded theory methodology. Thematic analysis is a qualitative approach useful for identifying, analyzing, and reporting themes through a flexible code-based process. The first step in conducting the thematic analysis was to gather and review the public comment data. Once I'd familiarized myself with the data, the comments were divided for more detailed analysis. Comments were first determined to be relevant or irrelevant. Relevant comments related to the prohibition of bag limit sales directly or indirectly, and irrelevant comments were removed from analysis. Direct opinions included statements that specifically addressed bag limit sales. Indirect opinions occurred during discussions of Dolphin Wahoo Amendment 2, when stakeholders discussed one of the other 7 management alternatives proposed by the Council, but failed to mention bag limit sales specifically. Since indirect opinions focused on other management topics, they were analyzed separately from direct opinions. Both direct and indirect opinions were divided into 2 categories. Explanatory comments, which I defined as those where the speaker gave an explanation supporting their opinion, and direct comments, where the speaker stated an opinion towards bag limit sales, but did not provide an explanation as to why they felt. There were no direct comments that were also direct opinions in this study. The explanatory comments provided insight into the ideas and opinions behind behavior, so they were used for thematic analysis. Stakeholder data gleaned from both explanatory and direct comments were recorded for statistical analysis. Once all the explanatory comments had been identified, I reread all the comments and generated initial codes using the qualitative analysis software in vivo. 2 additional researchers aided in this part of the analysis to remove bias and ensure analytical rigor. Next, all the codes were collated into potential themes, and then the themes were reviewed and refined until they best reflected the data. Once the final themes and subthemes were chosen, names and definitions were assigned to each. Lastly, simple percentages were conducted in Microsoft Excel for all relevant comments. Statistical analysis considered residents, stakeholder group, and preferred alternative for the proposed actions. Now moving on to the quantitative methods. So the quantitative data were comprised of recreational catch data from the charter sector, as well as environmental and economic data. Catch data came from the Marine Recreational Information Program, which is conducted by the National Marine Fishery Service. This program develops and distributes surveys to recreational anglers, including charter boat captains, to estimate total recreational catch and effort. For the purposes of this study, data were limited to Dare County, North Carolina, and Monroe County, Florida, from 2005 through 2018. Environmental data included stock population size, which reflected biological impact, and water temperature, which reflected large-scale environmental change. And then economic data included average gasoline price, which demonstrated changes in the cost of fishing. So the first step in conducting the quantitative methods was to compile the catch data with the environmental and economic data. Within this step, I calculated catch per unit effort for each charter. Catch per unit effort is a measure of relative abundance that is calculated by dividing the total catch by the amount of effort associated with that catch. For the purposes of this study, I divided the total number of fish that were caught and kept per charter by the number of individuals in that trip's party. Catch per unit effort was used as an indicator to determine whether the sales regulation caused a change in catch quantities among blue line tilefish, dolphin, and king mackerel. After the data was compiled, 2 non-parametric tests were run in RStudio. These tests were run to determine whether there was a difference in catch per unit effort before and after the management change. Spoiler alert, a significant difference was determined, which led to step 3. In step 3, a booster regression tree or BRT model was created using R. BRTs pull techniques from statistical and machine learning to improve the performance of a single model by creating multiple models that work together to optimize prediction ability. The results from a BRT model are easiest to interpret when the response variable is binary. As a result, the response variables used in this study were a binary indicator of whether the bag limit was reached. Multiple bag limits were used to depict ranges of catch per unit effort to demonstrate whether angler behavior would have changed under different bag limits. This table shows a breakdown of the different bag limits that were used for each species. So to depict catch per unit effort in a binary format, each charter was scored as belonging to one of 2 groups. Those where catch per unit effort was below the indicated bag limit and those where it was at or above it. The size of the bag limits chosen were based on the current bag limit so that a range of limits could be observed. 9 factors or explanatory variables were added to the model to help explain the changes in catch. Sales regulation was the variable we were most interested in, as it indicated whether the prohibition of bag limit sales had been implemented at the time of the charter. All 8 models were modified to yield the strongest possible results and enhance predictability. This required tuning and training the models multiple times. Once the models were finalized, a combination of partial dependence plots, variable importance scores, and decision trees were analyzed to determine whether each factor had an impact on catch per unit effort. All right, moving on to the results. And again, I'll start with the qualitative portion first. So a total number of 2,729 comments were reviewed for this study. Of the reviewed comments, 1,883 were deemed relevant, and 189 of these were explanatory comments that underwent thematic analysis. The remaining 1,694 were direct comments whose data was only applied towards stakeholder statistics. In total, 6 themes and 8 subthemes were identified from the thematic analysis. Of this total, 3 themes and all 8 subthemes were generated from the direct opinions for blue line tilefish, dolphin, and king mackerel. The remaining 3 themes were generated for the indirect opinions made regarding Dolphin Wahoo Amendment 2. First, I'll talk about the themes for the direct opinions, and then I'll discuss the themes for the indirect opinions. So the first direct opinion theme is titled Threats to the Status Quo, and it demonstrated how changes in management had the potential to alter the lives of stakeholders on a personal, business, and community level. Most stakeholders focus on the economic impacts they anticipated the sales regulation to cause. And these quotes are verbatim, so that's why there's a little funky looking quotation. The first subtheme that we talked about is personal, and that focused on the anticipated individual and family level impacts of the sales regulation. Anglers explain the importance of selling their catch either to cover expenses or to produce income to provide for their families. For many anglers, being able to sell their catch was the difference in their ability to make ends meet, and losing that ability would have required them to make a change in order to survive financially. The second subtheme was business. These comments explained how fishing-related businesses would be threatened by the proposed regulation. While a variety of businesses were mentioned, the predominant sector of interest were charter companies. Comments often explained how bag limit sales were essential to the survival of charter companies, especially amid other problems facing the industry, such as high fuel prices and increasing operation costs. Stakeholders feared the sales regulation would put companies out of business, cause job loss, and incentivize black market sales. The third subtheme was community. These comments addressed the anticipated effect the sales regulation would have on entire communities by affecting multiple businesses and industries simultaneously. Commenters explained how a variety of businesses, including hotels, restaurants, mechanics, supply stores, and marinas, would be negatively affected, resulting in a loss of jobs, a decline in tourists, and a decrease in tax revenue across the entire community. The second theme for direct opinions is recreational versus commercial. Comments within this theme focused on perceived differences in equality between the recreational and commercial fishing sectors. The first area of comparison was monetary. The dispute focused on perceived differences in costs and profits. Commercial anglers talked about the extra fees they were required to pay and how the sale of recreationally caught fish reduces their profit. Alternatively, charter anglers argued that they are not assured of a fixed income, and since they often receive fish in lieu of a tip, they rely on selling their fish to make a profit. The second area of comparison was management. Commenters discussed how requirements, quotas, impact, and catch regulations were not equal, causing their sector to be treated unfairly compared to the other. Those siding with the commercial sector thought it was unfair that recreational anglers don't have to abide by the same reporting or safety requirements that commercial boats do. On the other hand, the recreational sector thought it was unfair for their catch quotas to be reduced for the commercial sector when they believed that their small catch couldn't affect the health of the fishery. The last direct opinion theme considered the efficacy of current management practices. The first subtheme focused on the impacts the sales regulation would have on fishery health. Some commenters felt the fishery would benefit, others thought it would be harmed, while others thought the fishery would not be affected. While the perceptions varied, it was evident that commenters wanted effective management that led to a healthy and long-lasting fishery. They just disagreed whether prohibiting bag limit sales would be beneficial toward reaching this goal. The second subtheme was the accuracy of fisheries data. Some stakeholders thought the existing data was unreliable and should not be relied upon for decision making. Other stakeholders did not discuss the flaws in the existing data, but did push for the collection of additional data before passing regulation. This subtheme presents the overall message that stakeholders distrust the existing data and are wary of management decisions that are based on it. The last subtheme referenced the strength of enforcement. Commenters generally felt that enforcement was lacking, as evidenced by their own limited encounters with patrol agents. Arguments pushed for greater enforcement on the water and at the docks, which could help reduce illegal activities. Now I'll jump into the themes created from the indirect opinions. Remember, the indirect opinions refer to the alternatives that were proposed in conjunction with the sales regulation for dolphin. These themes are pretty similar to those were found in the direct opinions. So the first theme is flawed science. Comments revolve primarily around the idea that there was not enough scientific evidence to warrant a change in management. The second theme dealt with threats to the coastal economy. Comments were community-based, discussing how these changes could affect multiple types of businesses, including those affected by the tourist industry. Once again, charter companies were identified as likely to experience economic threats as they rely on tourists to support their businesses. Third, and the most heavily referenced indirect opinion theme, was fishery survival. Comments tended to focus on the proposed size limits and bag limits. Size limits were discussed more frequently, with some stakeholders in support of the proposed limits, while others weren't. Many stakeholders who were against size limits equated the management technique with increased fishing mortality. Bag limits were mentioned less frequently than size limits and appeared to be a more acceptable management choice. Overall, the comments in this theme appeared to be given out of a desire to have a long-lasting and abundant stock. All right, so now we will move on to the quantitative results. The non-parametric tests indicated that a change in catch did occur for all 3 species without considering annual and seasonal fluctuations in catch. This graph on the slide shows changes in catch per angler throughout the study period for each species in Florida, which is shown on the top row, and North Carolina, which is shown there on the bottom row. The impact each factor had on the models fluctuated as the species and bag limit changed. However, there were 3 major trends that appeared across all species and bag limits. The first and the main goal of this study was associated with the sales regulation itself. The results of all 8 models suggested that the prohibition of bag limit sales did not affect whether charter boats reached the bag limit, regardless of the species and the bag limit. Second, larger parties were found less likely to reach the bag limit, meaning that a party of 1 had a greater chance of reaching the bag limit than a party of 6. Third, charters based in North Carolina were shown more likely to reach the bag limit than charters in Florida. The models also yielded some species-specific insights. Year was shown to be an important variable in determining whether anglers reached the bag limit for blue line tilefish. The variable importance plot at the top shows that year has the greatest effect on catch, as determined by its scaled score of 1. The partial dependence plot below shows that a charter's ability to reach the bag limit declined from 2008 until 2010 and did not rebound within the study's time period. For dolphin, water temperature was shown to play a strong role in whether chartered boats reached the bag limit. Beginning at a temperature of about 22 degrees Celsius, the chances of the bag limit being met began to increase. For king mackerel, party size was deemed the most important variable, followed by water temperature. Unlike dolphin, which showed charter boats increasing their odds at reaching the bag limit as water temperature warmed, king mackerel shows a decline starting about 22 degrees Celsius. The contrasting effect that water temperature has on these 2 species, on king mackerel and dolphin, reminds us that biology and life history of the species matters when making management decisions. The same factor can affect species in entirely different ways. So there were 3 primary takeaways from this project. Oh, okay, sorry about that. 3 primary takeaways from this project in response to the research questions. First, the results from the thematic analysis tell us that most commenting stakeholders maintained a negative perception towards the sales regulation prior to its implementation. The explanatory comments tell us that stakeholders anticipated the regulation to have negative social and economic impacts and a negligible environmental impact. Second, the results from the BRT models tell us that the changes in charter catch in North Carolina and Florida were not due to the implementation of the sales regulation for blue line tilefish, dolphin, and king mackerel. The models show that the sales regulation had a negligible effect on whether charters met the bag limit for all tested bag limits. This means that the changes in catch observed in the non-parametric test were caused by other natural and human causes unassociated with the sales regulation. Together, these results inform us that the charter sector did not change their catch behavior in response to the imposed regulation. This study also provided us with some secondary takeaways as well. The first was that stakeholders were more likely to voice an opinion towards the sales regulation if they anticipated being negatively affected. The tendency to overemphasize the negative is well known among psychologists. It is likely there are more stakeholders who support the sales regulation than what appeared in this study. This finding is likely because anglers were the most vocal stakeholder group, making 70% of relevant public comments. Since anglers are the stakeholder group most directly impacted by changes to fisheries management, this finding makes sense. However, it also means that the voices of other stakeholder groups may have been overpowered simply because they didn't have as many participating individuals. Third, long, complex amendments were found to yield fewer explanatory comments and more direct comments. If the council seeks explanations from stakeholders to justify their opinion, incorporating controversial actions in smaller, less complex amendments would be useful. The BRT models indicated that the influence each factor has on catch per unit effort is specific to the species and the bag limit. This reminds us of the importance of species-specific management approaches. Lastly, the study gives no indication whether the prohibition of bag limit sales reduced the double counting of recreational catch, since charter behavior did not change due to the regulation. Stakeholder support is imperative to reaching conservation and management goals. The public comments made by the charter sector, in combination with a lack of behavioral change, indicates that the sector does not support the sales regulation. This lack of support could lead to ineffective management for the fisheries under analysis. Ineffective management could propagate the problem of double counting, leading to inaccurate data. Inaccurate data can then cause early closures in the commercial sector, which furthers the divide between recreational and commercial anglers. This divide brings us back to the beginning, as anglers are less likely to support regulation they see as harmful. Garnering stakeholder support, especially from the charter sector, is pertinent to breaking this cycle and leading to behavior change. The results from this study suggest several next steps in research and stakeholder involvement. One step is to implement other forms of data collection, such as surveys, interviews, or focus groups, to gather more stakeholder data. These methods will be especially helpful if targeted toward the charter sector to gain deeper insight into their current opinions on the sales regulation, as well as a better understanding of their response to the regulation. Another step is to expand education, engagement, and outreach efforts to get stakeholders more involved in the management process. Targeting the charter sector and underrepresented stakeholder groups could have significant impacts on future behavior. A third step is to conduct further research studies to determine the impact of the sales regulation on double counting. Studies that examine catch change among private recreational anglers could also prove insightful. More research is needed before repeal of the sales regulation can be considered. Here's a list of the references that I used in the slides. And that wraps up my presentation. So I guess we'll move on to the Q&A portion of today's event.
Thank you, Nicole. Excellent job. Yeah, so as Nicole indicated, we'd like to open up the floor to all of you for your questions. And this is an open session. One thing I'd recommend doing is on your screen, you can hit reactions and raise your hand. That way we know that you have a question to ask Nicole. And then once we close the public Q&A session, the committee will then meet and we'll go from there. So thank you again, Nicole. All right, Kayla has a question.
Hi. Okay, so first off, good job. Yay! So I have two questions for you, and I'm going to ask them at the same time because they're kind of related. So for your quantitative data, why did you choose North Carolina and Florida? And then why did you choose the years that you chose?
So North Carolina and Florida are both important for the charter sector. So they have a lot of charters that go to both of those locations. We picked Dare County and Monroe County. They're both representing barrier islands. So that includes the North Carolina Outer Banks as well as the Florida Keys. And it's on the ends of the South Atlantic region. So we sort of get a broad look at the whole region from those areas. And then the data was available. That's one of the big things. A big reason why I picked the charter sector was because that data is available and it's more accurate. And then the years that we picked was 2005 to 2018. So the quantitative data, the catch data, it changed like the way that they collected it in 2004, or like they changed in 2005 after 2004. So there was a change in how they collected it. So that's why we started in 2005. And then the regulations were in 2009, 2012, and 2014. So we picked that whole expanse just to get a good before and after of the time. And 2018 was our stopping point because when we started, data was not available for 2019 for everything we're looking for. I think that answered both of your questions.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Kayla. Thank you, Nicole. Any other questions?
I think there was another raised hand, but I think it went away. I don't remember where it was.
I had a question, but she answered it. It was about the White Chiefs, Florida and North Carolina.
Okay, well, perfect. Lucy.
So I have a question. The amount of data that you were analyzing was very, very intensive. It sounds like you did a lot of analysis and kind of combing through all of that. How would you recommend future studies be done in terms of saving time, or sort of what did you learn from this process that can be applied to a more efficient process, like maybe moving forward? This took you a year plus to do, and I know we're going to continue to do these studies. What would you recommend?
So for me, it was the first time really doing like a big qualitative project. So part of it was just like getting the data organized in a good way. So, you know, going forward, like for me, I could take that knowledge and like be better organized in the future. And I mean, for other people, I don't know, I think it would just, you know, it's just a matter of getting comfortable with the data. And like, once I was comfortable with it, it went a lot quicker. You know, if you had a team of people, it would also make things quicker. I had some help with the thematic analysis, like a little bit there at the beginning, and that was helpful. But, you know, having more people on it would be helpful. And Chip has been super helpful with all of the modeling in RStudio. But again, like, you know, if you have multiple people, that would be helpful. It's a lot of information, and like to keep it track, you know, throughout the whole process was a lot of work. But like, you know, how you would necessarily like make that better, I think it just comes with like, you know, people experience and practice.
No, that makes sense. I have another piggyback question based on something you said earlier. You said the way that the data was collected changed on a certain year. Was that correct? What you said, maybe 2004?
Yes, in 2004, they switched how they collected the catch data.
So do you think that these analysis will be impacted as probably people are collecting this data differently, or are they trying to kind of make that universal throughout, so all of this can be comparable throughout the US as opposed to just those states that you were looking at? Or how do you think that would impact data collection?
I'm not really sure what the data looks like in 2004 and before. So I'm not exactly sure like how it changed. But I mean, I think the data that they have right now is good. There's a lot of data there. We only pulled a few variables from the massive spreadsheet that they had. So I'm blanking on your question. But I think it could be, you know, stuff that could be built on and would be useful in the future for sure. At least like the data that I looked at for this project. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Nicole?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me? Okay. So Nicole, this is Uncle Tal. I would like to know, what did you learn in all of your research that surprised you the most?
What surprised me the most? So coming from undergrad, you know, it was all natural science. And part of the reason I really wanted to do this project was to get more of that social science perspective. I feel like I was missing that. You know, I went into this sort of like, not like anti-anglers. I don't want to like say that, but you know, like big on conservation, like let's save all of the fish. And I still feel that way, but you know, I think what I learned the most was just like seeing other people's perspectives and their opinions, and you know, figuring out like, okay, like this person feels differently than maybe I do about the situation, or like they feel differently than this other person. And, you know, nobody's right, nobody's wrong, just sort of like seeing that everybody can have different perspectives and like trying to find ways to hear each other and understand each other, and, you know, make policy and management that's, you know, hopefully good for the greatest number of people and the most number of fish. So what I learned, I think, was a perspective change and just really, you know, incorporating other people and not just like science, because, you know, science will only take us so far if we don't have human buy-in. If people aren't going to listen, then science doesn't matter. So yeah, getting the human perspective and like merging it with that science perspective, I think is so important to any sort of management going forward. So that's what I learned the most.
Thank you.
It's quiet out there. Any other questions?
I have a question for you, Nicole.
Okay.
So what would you say is the common ground then among stakeholders? Like just in general, what is that common ground?
You mean like in this study or just like
More broadly speaking.
More broadly? I mean, I think we all sort of have like a basic human desire to like, you know, care for ourselves, care for the people we care about, the things we care about. So like in this study, you know, I think all the stakeholders, they care about the fisheries, you know, they want to see them succeed. They just don't necessarily agree on how to go about that. So, you know, I think it's just sort of finding the common grounds among the people that you're working with. You know, in a broad sense, you know, we all care about something, you know, we all care about ourselves inherently. So just sort of like finding that common grounds and like figuring out a way, you know, to work together to achieve change, I guess.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, Susan.
Oh, we can't hear you.
Thank you. Somebody has to do that. Might as well be me. So I've been trying to kind of think about this whole discussion. So we were just talking about charter fishers and the people on their boat. And we also have the commercial fishers, and you saw a little bit of animosity in the comments there. And then we've got recreational fishers that aren't part of the charter industry. So how might we start to bring them together and try to smooth that out and have them participate together in the regulatory part of the fishery?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's pretty complicated, just because recreational commercial seems to have been butting heads, you know, for a long time. Like this is not a new issue. You know, I don't want to say like, oh, it all comes back to like education and like informing people, but I think in a way, like it does, like, you know, telling the anglers like what the council thinks, like what their data is telling them, and then like listening to each group and like, you know, making them just sort of like aware of what each other thinks, and that, you know, management is trying to look out for all of them. You know, if they could work together and see each other on the same page instead of opposite, like, you know, contrasting parties, that could be helpful. I know like one comment, the angler, he was like, you know, I sit on a bunch of different sort of like pegs, you know, maybe he was commercial and recreational, I don't really remember, but, you know, having it so that people sort of see the other people's point of views. And I know the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council does citizen science projects. You know, if getting multiple people from different groups involved with stuff like that, so they work towards a common goal, might be one way that we can help bridge this gap. But I don't think it's going to be easy or something that happens quickly. You know, it's going to take effort on like a personal and like sort of big scale.
So related to Susan's question, Nicole, would you tell us a little bit more about how these comments, so you went over like how the actual comments were collected, but how were anglers initially informed of these amendment modifications or these amendments and those the proposed changes to regulatory measures?
I am not an expert on all things that the council does. I'll just put that first and foremost. Chip or Christina are much more up in that alley, but they're informed about the meetings. I'm thinking like emails go out telling them about this stuff. It's on the website. I could be wrong. Yeah, so, you know, how extensive these networks go, I'm not exactly sure. You know, I think it's partially on, oh, Chip, you wanna jump in? Go ahead.
Well, I was going to let you explain for a little bit, but you were doing well. And you know, it has been a decade since we've been collecting information, and so things have changed over time. You know, email wasn't as popular back in 2009 as it is today. So a lot of ways we would communicate was through sending out flyers through the mail, trying to get to local docks or commercial fish houses and informing them that management changes were coming up. Word of mouth was a big way that we used to do it. Certain people we knew to connect with, and they would get the word out if they felt a regulation was very important for their region. And we tended to get a lot of comments from both Dare County and Monroe County, especially for these three species.
Christina, did you want to add?
No, Chip nailed it. And I was going to say, you know, one of the ways we solicit input from fishermen is getting those public comments at meetings. And now that you've become sort of familiar with the bulk of comments that come into the council, if you have any suggestions on better ways the council can solicit public comments that might make it a bit easier to sort of summarize for them or present to them, given that you've seen sort of the amount of work that goes into taking these comments and organizing them in a compelling way. So I was wondering if, based on the comments, you thought fishermen were looking for a better way to engage, and if you think there's a better way to engage fishermen in the council process.
You know, I don't really have a good sense of whether or not like they want to be more engaged or not. Because most of them was just sort of like, here is my opinion, you know. They weren't necessarily giving suggestions or anything of that nature. It was a lot more just like, this is what I think. Like, you're wrong because of this. Like, I'm right because of this kind of thing. And, you know, I think, at least like looking at from this study, like being able to have data that's like post-regulation could be really helpful. So I was thinking like, oh, is there some way you can do like some sort of like online like forum or something, to where people could just sort of submit like post regulation comments. You know, I don't necessarily know that that's possible, but it'd be really helpful, just to kind of see how these people think about the regulation afterwards, and it not be totally like based on like public comments beforehand. It could also be a way to get some positive comments in there, just because, you know, it's all negative, and making it easy for people. I saw something about social media and how people who have a positive impact with a business are like more likely to post something positive on social media. It's even like somehow incorporating ways like that, that made it easy for people. I mean, I don't know if, you know, anglers are into social media, but most people are. I mean, would it relate to management? You know, I have no idea. But, you know, I don't know. I feel like finding other ways besides just sort of like, oh, you have to come to a meeting, or, oh, you have to like know who to send it to, like a comment to, could be helpful. I know that's sort of a roundabout answer, but Christina, I can definitely get with you and like share some more ideas, so we're not taking up all these people's time. But that's sort of my like general, like broad overview answer to that question.
No, thank you. I appreciate that input. We do actually use social media, and we have an online form that we use to gather comments, typically during the development of an amendment. And so I think the comment you made about trying to solicit, you know, comments and information maybe after regulations have gone into place to get an opinion on their effectiveness would be interesting, and something that we've talked about trying to get more information on. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Nicole, I have a question. These regulations were initially had negative acceptance by the fishermen, et cetera, but time has gone by. What do you think should be done into the future? Do you think these new regulations are just by now going to be accepted, or should they be eliminated, or what should happen moving into the future? And what would be the acceptance by fishermen?
Yeah, so without having like post regulation data from the fishermen, like I can't say whether or not they now support it or don't, but it certainly seemed like they didn't. You know, they didn't change their behavior, which they inherently didn't have to. I mean, there was no restriction on like, oh, you guys, you know, can't catch more fish. They just couldn't sell it. Oh, I'm blanking. Okay. But, you know, so I don't necessarily know how they feel about it now. Without asking them, you know, doing some sort of like survey or focus group or interview could be helpful. Like I sort of answered Christina's question, like just getting in that like post-regulation feedback, I think would be really important, because at this point we really don't know. This has sort of been looking at like, okay, you know, what did they think before management, you know, and like how do they respond, but we don't necessarily know how they personally feel about it now. So I think without that information, it's really hard to sort of take a step forward. And this study didn't answer the questions about double counting. So we don't necessarily know, you know, did they actually stop selling their fish or not? And I think that's really important to know as well, because it could be that this regulation did affect double counting, or it may not have. And without knowing that, you know, we don't necessarily know exactly how effective it was, at least from my perspective. I could be wrong on that. So I think we definitely need to get more data and sort of go out about and find that out before we do anything else. Because, you know, if it did work, if it did keep people from selling fish that were caught recreationally, then like at least, you know, it worked, even if it you know, may not have been a popular choice. Was that a good answer for you? Okay. Yes.
Susan?
Yeah, sorry, I can't figure out another way to do things. So I guess that's my question. So did it work? There wasn't a big change in catch, correct?
Right. So the change in catch did not seem to have any effect at all on the cells regulation, or cells regulation didn't seem to have an effect on catch, which led me to the conclusion that, you know, behavior did not change. So they were still catching the same amount of these species before and after the cells regulations. Things changed, but that was based on some of the other factors that we included, like gas price or year, stuff like that. But the cells regulation, from what I could tell, did not have an effect on the amount of species of these 3 species that they were catching. So it didn't seem like they were doing anything differently.
Okay, do we have any other questions from the general public? Okay. Well, I want to thank you all again for coming to Nicole's thesis defense. You did a fantastic job. And if we could give one more Zoom round of applause.
Good job, good job. Bravo.
I will ask our general public to please leave the Zoom meeting, and the committee please stay on.
There we are.
I always have to go through and remove people. Okay. Ashley, I am going to make you the host of this meeting, and I am going to leave. If you have any additional questions, I am available through phone or email if you need me. But Nicole, one final great job. Definitely a lot of data and definitely a lot of questions. So let me know if I can help at all. And Ashley, I think, oh, okay, you are the host now. Thank you all.
Bye,
Oh,
Lucy. Thank you.
And oh, Lucy, would you stop recording too?
It stops on my end, and then
Oh, okay.
I'll flip it.